Folks, it's a real honor for us to have with us today Dr. Sanjeev Pucon. Dr. Pucon comes to us originally from the Minnesota state system. He is internationally known for his work with mid-sized and small to medium enterprise companies. He's consulted with over 150 companies worldwide. And it's a real honor to have him here. He's currently a professor of business administration, the director of international relations at Bemidji State University, and he will be here to talk to us about hard times, the financial crisis facing American universities. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to talk about today is actually very specific and very narrow. It doesn't have the kind of global reach that some of the things we've heard today do. But on the other hand, I think it contains a series of lessons for us all, actually, no matter where we are in the world. As Phil said, I work in the Minnesota State University system. This is a subject that's dear to my heart and dear to my wallet. I've been an employee of this state system for almost 32 years, and so what's been happening here has had a great deal of impact on me, my environment, my colleagues, my family, and everything else. The state of Minnesota has a disproportionately large, and that's a positive thing, disproportionately large state university system. For those of you who aren't immediately familiar with the geography of the United States, the state marked in red is Minnesota. It's way up north, and it's snowing there today. It borders Canada, and sometimes I really do wish I didn't live there. But most of the time, I'm happy that I am there. If you blow it up and take a look at it, it kind of looks like this. Our state is, as I said, one of the northern states. And we have a very, very large number of state institutions. All the little dots and triangles and circles and things like that are part of what we sometimes not so affectionately refer to as MINSCU, or the Minnesota State College and State University System. The little blow up over there, the circle, of course, is the state metropolitan area, Minneapolis-St. Paul, St. Paul being the capital. The university system itself, and this is kind of relevant because some of the numbers that we look at over here have some bearing on what I'm going to say. And what I'm going to say is probably going to be rather controversial. My provost and vice president is here today, and I'm hoping that by the end of my talk, he isn't busy trying to find a pink crayon so he can color a paper in that color. But anyway, we're 31 institutions, 7 of which are state universities ranging in size from 4,000 students all the way up to the mid-teens. And we have 24 community and technical colleges, that some of which are spread around more than one campus. And we serve a total of 47 communities in the state. We have a total of 430 total students in all these institutions, which amount to about 58% of the state's undergraduate students. And those of you that are quick on your mental calculators, that translates to about 740,000 students in the entire state, which is pretty big. It is the 5th largest state university system in the nation, and we're not even close to being, I think, in the top 10 in terms of population. So it's pretty good in terms of the number of students that we educate through our public university system. This figure, by the way, doesn't include our flagship university, which is the University of Minnesota, which is also a state university, but is governed through a system that is different from ours. So if you included that, you'd have to throw probably another 25 plus, or maybe 30,000, I can't remember exactly how many it is on all our campuses, that many thousand students into the mix. But what's very important to us is that we have a pretty good placement rate, but the number I think that's going to be relevant in a future part of this discussion, where I'm going to say some things that I think might seem fairly controversial, is that 80% of our graduates end up staying in our own state. They look for and seek work within our state, and many of them never leave. They might change careers within the state and move around, but they stay in the state of Minnesota. They tend to be homebodies. I want to start out today a little bit by talking about what's happened to us in the last few years. We've had a very painful 4 years. State university faculty have not had a raise in salary for 4 years. We've had a freeze. Our own university has lost about 15 to 20% of its faculty in cuts that can only be described as draconian. And the pain and pinch has been felt across state campuses throughout the state. And a couple of years ago, as I was walking with some friends and colleagues, I said, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 or 20 years that this wasn't a state university anymore, that either it was closed because it was financially not viable, or if it was sold. And they looked at me like I was nuts. You know, I said, you can't do that. You can't sell a state university. And I said, well, why not? You know, why can't you sell a state university? Tell me where it says that you can't. Well, you just can't do it. Well, has it happened? Well, it hasn't maybe happened in quite the way that we look at it over here, but something very similar has happened. Right now, if you've been following the news, you'll have discovered, or you might have known, that the University of California, Los Angeles, their Anderson School, which is ranked number 15 in the United States in terms of business schools for its MBA, is planning to go private by 2015. In other words, they are essentially buying themselves out of the system. So yes, you know, yes, things can be sold. They may not be sold in exactly the way that we might have envisioned, but it can happen. And the dean of that particular school, Judy Olian, who is a very, very competent woman, basically has said, and her language is very polite, I would have said something entirely different. She basically says that the University of California, and you might have heard about this and what Jerry Brown had to do. I mean, the cuts in the University of California system were in the billions, not in the millions. They have experienced continuing decline in state support, making fiscal stability a challenge. Basically, they can't plan for what kind of monies are going to come to them at any one point of time. And the floor is constantly shifting underneath them, so they have no way of knowing what to do as they go forward. No business person, no household, nobody who has to ever balance a checkbook and has to make plans going forward would like to live in that kind of environment where the rules of the game and the environment are changing constantly. They get 18% of their budget from the University of California system, and that includes the course fees that they themselves collect. So if you take that out of the equation, basically they only get about $6 or $8 million from the state. And they say, well, we'll easily find that somewhere else, so we'll just go private. And we'll, you know, that $6 or $8 million that we're going to get from the state of California, we'll just give back to them. We don't need it anymore. Has it happened before? Yes, it has. And at the University of Virginia, the Darden School gets $0 from the Commonwealth of Virginia, gets nothing. They have taken themselves private about 8 years ago. Okay, they get nothing. At the UC, the Faculty Senate said that going private for the Anderson School was inconsistent with the research mission of the university. It basically, what it did was that the commitment that faculty who were hired to perform public and community service as part of their duties and their responsibilities and their moral obligation to the academy, those would no longer be carried out if in fact it went private. I would beg to differ. There are enough private institutions where these things happen and happen very, very well indeed. Okay? Just because today I'm hired by a public university and tomorrow I'm not, doesn't mean that I change my attitude and I change the way I do things. So that, I think, is pretty much rubbish. There have also been some statements where they've said that if the school doesn't need that 6 or 8 million, they should just give it back right now. I think that's pretty petulant. I mean, basically, that doesn't mean anything. It's an absolutely mindless argument. It's not that they don't need the 6 or 8 million. It simply means they can find it easily somewhere else. In fact, they'll find a heck of a lot more. The arguments against selling the school, so they say, are many. It should serve the state. if they do this, they won't follow the regulations of the university. I mean, it's almost like they believe that all the privates, the Harvards, the Yales, the Stanfords, are all anarchist institutions that follow no rules whatsoever and go as pretty much as they please. Of course, that doesn't happen, okay? There are certain things, of course, and certain arguments that do work. You couldn't do this in Colorado, for example, because in Colorado, the state constitution says you can't do it. So they would actually have to change the constitution of the state before they took a university private. In California, no such thing exists, and they can actually do it. The problem that we've got over here that most people acknowledge is the fact that if you want to cut funding, why then do you want to leave the level of regulation at the same point that you always have? In other words, you don't want to be a financial stakeholder, but you want to tell us what to do. And that is something that increasingly people are having a problem with. There was a show on National Public Radio in July of 2012 where the question was asked to the person that was being interviewed worked for the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is something that I think people worldwide read. And they basically said, can you really consider a public university to be public when the amount of public funding has become zero or minuscule? It's 6% at the University of Virginia. It's 4.5% for the University of Michigan. It's less than 7% for so many other state universities. Where I work, when I started 31 years ago, it was 70%, and today it's less than 30%. More than a drop of 1% a year, and I personally can't ever see that it would turn around and go in the other direction. And nobody in their right mind actually thinks that's going to happen. There might be a blip or two. Things are looking good, let's throw them a bone. But that's about all that we're going to see. So this can happen. And I think people do choose. Is there going to be some sadness here? Yes. It's a long story. I mean, the history of public universities in the United States is a long and illustrious one. The oldest ones right now are Rutgers, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the University of Georgia. The actual designation, however, belongs to the College of William and Mary, which started in 1693, but when it did, it was private at that time, but it's public now. Every single state in the United States has at least one public university, and many, like ourselves, have several, okay? Most of them came about through the Land Grant Acts of 1862, when the federal government essentially allowed states to sell $30,000 or 30,000 acres of federally owned public land and use the money to finance public institutions that were supposed to teach practical matters. For those of you that spoke earlier on and talked about the mission of the university in terms of providing education that led to employment, this would then, of course, be an arrow in your quiver, because obviously they started right at that time. In other words, teach them practical matters. I don't happen to agree with all of that, but there it is. As a result, many of them started as teaching institutions. They were normal universities. They taught teachers that would then go out and get a job. And for example, UCLA, as it is, since we talked about it earlier on, was originally the California State Normal Schools, not even the actual campus, but it was a southern branch, and now it's grown to what it is today. So what's it like? Well, I keep wanting to move away. The higher education is the institution is similar to that of K through 12 education. When parents don't parent, they blame the school system, and when something goes wrong in our economy, they blame higher education because, of course, we're not doing things right in providing the right inputs for our market. And in 2005, PBS produced a documentary where they and it was called Declining by Degrees, and they talked about higher education at risk at that time, where they accused higher education in the United States of being, I think the unkindest cut is this one, mediocre. I mean, I would rather be awful or great. Mediocre is like blah, so I don't want to be that. But it was unaffordable, unaccountable, and uninspiring. Lots of accusations in terms of students that don't learn, teachers that don't teach, college sports in the United States that are out of control in terms of costs. It's very, very, very common in the US, as you know, for the high school, for the football coach to make way more money than the college president. Okay, and of course the associated scandals when they hit the newspapers and the news, of course, are also much more important. But you know, and of course, students and states and taxpayers are having to foot the bill for public university excesses and inefficiencies. The laundry list of faults and things where we went wrong was huge. But the fact is, 3 out of 4 of every undergraduate student in the United States attends a public university. They attend a public university, get employed, and 80% of them put the money back, right back into the state that they got their education in, and raise the state's tax base and everything else. So we can come back to that. I don't know how much time I'm going to have. There are basically 6 challenges ahead as far as I can see. First of all, increasingly legislatures want us to be accountable for what we do, and they want to measure how we do it. Performance-based appropriation, which we look at retention and attainment. Okay, readiness for college. If they're not ready, how do you fix it? Many states won't allow you to do that within the college. Immigration, in terms of undocumented students, do we allow them to enroll in state universities? But the last 3, grant aid, the shrinking dollar, and rising tuition, all have to do with money. They're all financial constraints that we're facing right now. If you look at it over the last 5 years, this is the picture. Red means its usual thing, decline. Okay? You can see that most of the states have had a decline in appropriations, and the darker the red, the more it is. New Hampshire, where Patty comes from, you know, it's over 40%. Of course, they never had anything to start with, so it didn't really matter. Half of 0 is still 0, so it doesn't make much difference. But Arizona is right about there too. Okay, so this is what we've seen over the last 5 years. And at the same time, in the years that I've had my older daughter, 25 to be precise, tuition has gone up by 70%. And last year alone, you know, in 2011 to 2012, the average was 8.3%. You know, grants are down, student debt is up, tuition is up. Okay, I'm not going to be able to finish what I want to say, so I better hurry through. Take a look. Look at what's happened in Arizona and California. In just 5 years, tuition up by almost 80% in Arizona as the housing market tanks. Tuition up by 72% in California alone. I have a child that attends the University of California, San Diego, and I can tell you, it's been awful. So this is what we've seen. You can see, and this is all, for all 50 states, basically the amount of tuition increase. Okay, so it's been awful, the whole thing. And the obvious things in terms of, you know, what have the universities had to do in terms of trying to meet this, you know, rising class sizes, more tuition, and so on and so forth. I want to get to the end over here. Lots of real problems over here. We've seen minor improvements in the last year. The economy has improved somewhat, and suddenly the picture for the last year looks like this. There's a little bit of greening, okay, but not a whole lot, and I really do not think that it's going to be consistent in the long haul. So, what should we do? Well, this is the part that I think people are going to find a little controversial. But no day is complete unless you can annoy people on both sides of the spectrum. Okay, so I consider myself well served if I can tick off the liberals as well as the conservatives on this one. Obviously, we have to gain efficiency. There's no doubt that our state universities have become bureaucracy heavy, administratively heavy, and we need to find ways to cut that. We all know that revenue streams are down while populations are up, and yet a few single-minded folks can hold the entire nation and states hostage by saying there will be no new taxes, period. But yeah, I think we're going to eventually have to bite the bullet and raise taxes so we can get more revenues to go to our state universities for the public good, because not everything that we get out of the state university system has to be measured in tangible dollar terms. So yeah, we do need to do that. I also think that even though people are kicking and screaming about tuition, including myself, as I pay the University of California out-of-state tuition, which exceeds $50,000 a year, in some states, there's going to be no choice but to raise tuitions. There is no way that states are going to be able to provide the services that they do without raising tuition. I say this in a very calculated way. In our own state of Minnesota, we do not have out-of-state tuition. Every single student pays in-state tuition. Our tuition rates, frankly, need to go up. Otherwise, we can't provide the services that we have. Is it still a good deal? Yes, it is. A college education is a great deal. Will you make money if you go to school? The College Board likes to say a bachelor's degree is worth $1 million. It's not quite $1 million, but it's close. Over a 40-year work life, you are going to get $856,960 more. And if you bring that to present value terms at a 6% interest rate, you're still ahead of the game. Now, this is just an average. Some make less and some make more. But right now, as it stands, for a $100,000 college degree, you're still pretty much ahead of the game. If you go further, you'll make a little bit more money yet. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. We have a few questions, please. Sir.
That tuition fee should go up further.
I don't think they said that. I think they said that student debt went up by 450%. If you're talking about the number that a previous speaker had on there, out there, yeah. It was that total student debt has risen by 450%.
Now, I read somewhere that, if I'm not mistaken, that the tuition fees in the U.S. or the fund or the amount spent on university education in the U.S. has actually gone up a lot versus the if I'm not mistaken, the per capita income.
They have. The number that I think you're referring to, I think it might even have been Phil.
It wasn't mine.
Yeah, I think he said 450%
was the student debt.
Was the student debt. And per capita income had median income had gone up by 2.1%.
In that same 12-year period.
In that same 12-year period.
Tuition has gone up about 140%.
Yeah, and yeah, okay, so that's what it is. Yeah, it's... Well, I mean, the fact that, you know, I'll be controversial, what the heck. The fact that it's gone up by 140% doesn't necessarily mean that it's gone up enough. Maybe you started too low.
Situation in the U.S., the median income hasn't really gone up that much. Well, so how could the tuition fee be going so much? How could the people afford it?
Well, that's just the point. I mean, in South Carolina, when the legislature met for the first time after the election of the new governor, the end conclusion that they reached essentially was that, what good is it if you can't afford it? You know, and which is a very fair and reasonable statement, that if you can't afford it, what difference does it make? But I think that when you go back and take a look at it, some of the question about affordability is based on what it used to be, okay? And I think that a real objective look at what tuition ought to cost needs to, I mean, I'm not saying that tuition for every state university needs to go up. I'd be delighted if the tuition at the University of California system never went up again, okay? Because I'm already paying an exorbitant amount, and I don't think they can reasonably make the case, since their out-of-state tuition is already the same as the privates. You know, I don't think they can reasonably make the case for raising tuition. But there are many states, especially in the South, you know, whose tuition rates are abysmally low, okay, whose incomes are also abysmally low, but they don't reflect the reality of the situation. They've been kept artificially low for a very, very long time because basically it's a political, it's political suicide. Just as you know right now, you know, to vote for gun legislation in the United States is political suicide. It's political suicide to say, I'm going to raise tuition or I'm going to raise taxes. Walter Mondale said, I'm going to raise taxes, and he won one state out of 50, and that was Minnesota. And I think that's part of the problem, is that, you know, it's a very unpopular decision, but I think some states have no choice but to eventually raise tuition to levels that reflect the reality of the situation. I'm not saying that just take it, you know, and raise it to whatever you want. But if it's artificially low, And if it's been kept there artificially low for political reasons, the time has come to re-examine that.
How about one more question up here in the front?
One of the reasons that tuition fees have rocketed is the madness of increasing capital expenditure in buildings in the Anglo-American universities, certainly. And to go back to the previous speaker, higher education is one of the least sustainable areas of human endeavor because most of those buildings have incredibly low occupancy rates. They're empty most of the time because of the agricultural calendar and the failure to have any flexibility around that.
I would
agree. Now, so just to finish that off, this tyranny of location, tyranny of capital expenditure can be solved by shifting online. And it's a great failure. In a sense, higher education is cutting its own throat by continually driving up prices, by building things which are totally inappropriate in the modern age.
I would agree. And in fact, that, if you recollect, when people looked at me as if I was Looney Tunes when I said that, maybe we ought to sell this thing. Because my point was exactly that the bricks and mortar, which is what the state, one of the arguments that the state makes, that this is why you can't sell our university. We paid for all this 75 years ago. We own the land, we own the buildings. You can't sell the university even though, it has no debt. This is ours. Well, yeah, but you sell the blue sky part of it. I mean, I might own a business. I don't have to sell the building. I can still sell the business. And I think you're right. You need to separate the two. After all, you can have a university in any building anywhere if you really had to. You can make do